So much to discuss today following a weekend of rugby in which England shocked France at Twickenham and Ireland made a statement win at Murrayfield. The most recent headline, however, is that Warren Gatland is departing Wales as head coach after their 14th consecutive defeat. Joining myself, Brendan and Nick today to discuss all, calling us from France is former England centre Jamie Noon. A million things to talk about. We are recording about an hour after it's been unofficially announced that Warren Gatland is departing Wales with immediate effect. So they'll be without him for the rest of the championship. Obviously, he's contracted till 2027, but it had already been forecast that he would leave Wales at the end of the championship. We probably saw it coming, 14 defeats in a row. That takes away from the headline that England upset the French, which we'll also get into. So a lot to talk about. Of course, we've got a breather, a rest week now, so we're just going to review everything, including Gatland, which is where we'll be starting. Joining us from France, I believe, is former England centre Jamie Noon. How are you, Jamie?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
You are in France, right? Whereabouts are you?
Yeah, I'm in Brive. So I played at Brive and I stayed there, so we still live there.
And your son's Brive under 19s, isn't he, at the moment?
Yeah, it's under 21, so he's Espoirs, yeah. So
okay, great.
I mean, out of action at the moment with a broken hand.
When did that happen?
3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago now.
So fairly early doors. Oh well, yeah. I hope he gets a speedy recovery with that. Obviously, I know he's potentially said he may go on to represent France or is looking to do that. That must have left you feeling slightly conflicted on Saturday, maybe, or certainly him feeling.
Well, no, because then you kind of always winning. I think that it's a tough one because the French see me as English and the English probably see me a little bit as French. But I always say before the game that whoever wins, we're winning as a family. But if France win, then we get a week of banter, which is interesting. But yeah, no, we were on the good side in the end, so it worked out okay.
So were you jumping off the sofa when Elliot Daly scored, or were you fairly neutral?
I actually no. I mean, we had my son and his girlfriend round, so I was kind of trying to, and some local friends, so I was trying to play it down a little bit, but obviously I was jumping inside so I was relieved more than anything.
Is your son's girlfriend French?
She's French, yeah.
Okay, so she'd obviously picked her side. Well, yeah. I think there is a more pressing headline before we get sidetracked with the England game. I thought it was going to be the main event of this podcast, but Wales have jumped the gun with Warren Gatland's departure. It's a funny feeling because obviously it's been such a strange reign, and this has almost felt inevitable. Jamie, how do you feel about it? It obviously doesn't fix any issues really, but the timing of it makes it seem like they're trying to, which is strange.
Well, I think after losing to Italy, there's always going to be some. There's got to be some reaction in some form. It's just been it's been coming a little while. I think maybe with Gats, they've not necessarily improved. There's lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. With regard to the federation and stuff, so there isn't just straight, we'll sack the coach and everything will be fine. They've changed some coaches recently as well, and there doesn't seem to be any real change there. I think turning over a new leaf might be the answer, but again, it's going to take time for someone coming in to be able to impress his style, his game plan, and they obviously need the strength and depth in terms of players as well. So there's lots of factors there that maybe sort of we won't necessarily see the results quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, has Gatland got anything saliently wrong this championship? Obviously, the persistence with Ben Thomas at 10 leaves people scratching their heads. The ignoring the likes of Max Llewellyn despite his club form, but other than that, it hasn't looked like a team that Jack Morgan apart is really throwing punches.
Yeah, I think he's. Listen, I mean, it's like every coach who's really under immense pressure, they're going to struggle at times, and I think that Warren has. I think that the failure to use Max Llewellyn indicates the sort of confusion that there was around selection. Because the Gloucester trio of Thomas Williams, Anscombe and Llewellyn was working pretty well at club level. So you wonder why it wasn't good enough for Wales and why, all those permutations came in. But I think that one of the other real issues that he's got is just incredibly for Welsh rugby is a lack of depth everywhere almost, and particularly up front. In the front five, he doesn't have enough players of real Test caliber. I don't think. You look at some of the props that he's picking, and they're good club journeymen, but they're not Test caliber. So I think that he's had to try and make bricks without straw to a degree, but you could argue that he's compounded the issues.
Yeah. I mean, let's not jump the gun and talk about next candidates just yet. But Brendan, I mean, who's on your radar, or who would be on your radar?
Well, I mean, first of all, just to say it is an odd one. I mean, I think there's a personal dimension to this. I think he's probably had enough. You can only take so much, and you can talk brave and talk big, and you're there for the long haul. But actually, there comes a point you think, I'm in the way here. Having said that, it's a bit of a hospital pass. The next 3 matches are pretty tough for Wales. You would have thought maybe the incumbent would take them on board, take the hits. There's probably going to be a couple of defeats at least, and it's difficult to see a win, isn't it? But, take that on board so the new guy starts afresh. So that one I find a little bit odd, but I think it's on a personal level he's left. Who's on the radar? Well, Stuart Lancaster's on the radar. Michael Checker's on the radar. If I was really looking to the future, I'd be finding out what Simon Easterby's contractual arrangements are with Ireland. He seems to me a very coming man. It's got to be a big operator, because it's a big job. This isn't a little, this is not an interim appointment. This is not a, we'll make do with what we can get. This has got to be almost like a messianic figure. This. Yeah. And the other thing to say is Wales have got form on this. Nobody is immune to being sacked down in Wales. Graham Henry got sacked. Mike Rudder got sacked after a Grand Slam early in the season, Six Nations seasons. That's the way they do it down there. They sort of overreact to a certain extent, and I think it's gonna, it's cost them dear in the past. And they've got to get this right now. They've got to get it right. Having done this, there has to be a plan.
Yeah. I mean, New Zealand is where they always tend to go, or they certainly have tended to go for, more than a decade now, and a couple of decades. So there's Clayton McMillan at the Chiefs in New Zealand is somebody who I know that, or I think that they've got their eye on as well. His record's pretty impressive. But
Joe Schmidt's coming to an end as well in Australia.
Yeah, that's a good call. That surprised me a bit. I didn't realise he had a sort of get-out clause there after the Lions.
That's in relation to his family's health
situation. I think it is, yeah.
I think I'm right in saying he's continuing as director of rugby for Australia. I think I'd read anyway, so in a sort of Rassi Erasmus Jacques Nienaber way. So I don't know. And obviously it would mean a big geographical displacement for Joe. Yeah. Obviously he'd be a great scoop. But I mean, the trouble is, Jamie, who wants to take on this job? Even the comment sections I'm reading now off the Gatland post are saying that this is a 50-year issue, really, which is maybe overstating it slightly, but it's an issue of you're working in it as part of a union that's faltering, and they've kept fairly quiet. Gatland's actually been very good and very transparent about how difficult things are, I think. But the likes of a Ronan O'Gara, Stuart Lancaster, who are going to be, demanding the big bucks, would you want to take on something that is essentially a not so well-oiled machine and is rusty?
I suppose it depends how long you're out the game. If you're out the game, you need to get back in, then that obviously would be a huge opportunity. Welsh rugby has always been traditionally very, very strong, even though they've not necessarily had the same resources as everyone else. They've had some awesome players come through their system and stuff. So maybe, they're confident they can back themselves and they can figure out a way to work around the troubleshooting they have up to now and try and make a difference, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a total rebuild that's needed, the way you see it as well, presumably.
Yeah, I think there's obviously it's easy to sort of come in at the top and think that's enough, but they need to be looking all the way down. They need to be making sure that they're feeding the clubs with quality talent that can come through and go on to international rugby, but also just to be effective at international rugby. It's not just having the numbers to put out a team. You've got to be able to compete, and that's the difference at the moment. They're playing against teams obviously like France, even England. They've got a lot of strength in depth.
Yeah, and they're obviously staring 17 losses in a row in the face at the moment, unless somehow one of the Triple Crown opponents they managed to scalp them. Question to the floor, I suppose. Retroactively, I think Gatland's win percentage since taking over is in the low 20s, 23%. Wayne Pivac departing seemed like a misnomer at the time. I was talking to my flatmate the other day who's Australian, and that Australian win in Rugby World Cup 2023 was undoubtedly the high point. It was like a mile away. But question to the floor, does that make Pivac's departure and bringing Gatland in look like a little bit of a mistake, given that it's not exactly blooded a new age for Welsh rugby?
Well, it was a bit of a knee jerk, I must admit. I thought at the time. Gatland's a funny one. He has coached way more matches than any other Welsh coach, but his record is quite a bit behind the likes of John Dawes, Graham Henry, Mike Ruddock in percentage wins. What he did do was he coached 3 Grand Slam teams when he had a good squad. When he had Sean Edwards as his number 2, he got it together and he absolutely maximised it in 3 seasons, which sort of glossed over, some pretty major problems in Welsh rugby. And actually, we said that at the time. The national team was way ahead of the domestic game they had in Wales. It papered over all the cracks, and the chickens have come home to roost now. So he's got an odd record, Gatland. Lots of silverware, but percentage-wise, quite a bit below some of the other big-name coaches.
I mean, the way they went was, they could see that domestically their game wasn't holding up on the club front, and it became a little bit like a sort of super version of what Woodward did in 2003 in terms of predicating everything on the national team. So the fitness, the conditioning, everything was around that, and Gatland was also shrewd enough to maximize, I think, on the abilities of the players that he had. Everybody talked about, this sort of Warren Ball and the big carriers in midfield, Jamie Roberts, etc. And he was criticised for that, but the criticism, sort of absolutely faded away in the face of what he achieved in terms of those Grand Slams. And they did paper over the cracks, as we can see now. And those cracks now have to be addressed without a shadow of a doubt.
I think the decision from Warren's probably the strange one. Like you say, he did really well in that sort of first stint to come back, knowing, I'm assuming, what he did about the club rugby, etc., the problems with the federation, to come and risk, unfortunately, his career. Unfortunately, he's gonna leave this second stint with a little bit of a bit of taste in his mouth, in a sense, because everybody's going to review his time as a coach as these last 19 games.
Yeah. I suppose was it unhelpful that Wales performed well enough at Rugby World Cup 2023 to mean that they've sort of had this awkward 18-month interim period, which is almost equatable to England's 18-month or 2-year period post Eddie Jones, during the Eddie Jones era. They effectively nearly got to a Rugby World Cup semi-final with this group of players minus a couple of names like your George Norths, your Dan Biggers. That means that they're now restarting 2.5 years away from the next World Cup, and therefore surely disadvantaged.
Well, I mean, you still got time, to be fair. 2.5 years, you still got time. It's just, you've got to scour any sort of, any Welsh blood anywhere and try and, bring players of quality in, and try and work really hard behind the scenes to make sure that those guys come through. The key would be, I suppose, the style of play they want. Whoever the new coach is, he's going to have to imprint, I suppose, his ideas on Welsh rugby, and that's got to, I suppose, also go down to the regions. If you want guys playing a certain style, a certain way, then you've got to try and ask the clubs to try to a certain extent to offer the similar sort of options.
It is still one of the biggest crashes I've ever seen. Was it 48 they beat Australia?
I think it was 40 points to 6.
Something like that, to where they are now. I mean, it's almost unimaginable, really. I didn't see it coming to that extent. Just another little thing that occurred to me. I mean, I'm listening to Dan Bigger commentating. I watched Justin Tuprick have a great game for the Ospreys the other day. It does seem to me that perhaps not enough effort was made to keep some of the senior players on board. You watch Ireland, Sexton was there until he was 38. Peter O'Mahony's still going strong. You need those kind of figures in a squad, especially when you're going through a really hard transition. So I'm just wondering if there was a breakdown of communication with senior players there.
You'd argue they've stuck with the wrong ones. Liam Williams, like we said last week, that I think
he's gone,
appears to have lost several steps. Josh Adams, a bit brutal take, but I can't remember the last good game I saw him have in a Wales shirt, and he was error-ridden on Saturday. Maybe the Dan Bigger example, certainly having someone who can take a game and a situation by the scruff of the neck for sure.
Yeah.
Are we expecting an interim coach obviously they've got a 2-week lull to get their act together, or some semblance of together. Are we expecting an interim coach for the time being and an announcement later down the line later this year?
I think Rob Howley would take over, won't he? I mean, he's actually done a full season. Did he not win a championship, Rob Howley, when Gatland was away one time with the Lions? Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think there's any problem there as such. And then that has to be the route. You're not going to get the big name in the next month.
No.
I don't think they can afford to either, can they?
No.
That's the other thing.
How are they going to be able to afford to in a few months?
Well, yeah, I don't know.
A massive fundraise from benefactors.
It also depends on what terms Gatland has left, whether he's resigned or, he's going but taking a payout or whatever. I mean, that's going to be quite important because there is limited money down there. And, it could be quite an expensive business. It might be amicable and, just to shake their hands and 6 months pay. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's why they've kept him so long, because they couldn't afford to get rid of him. And they waited for him to sort of fall on his sword.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty honest take on what might have happened, actually, Jamie. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, look, like I say, it's fairly raw news. There may be an announcement or two about the immediate next steps in the next couple of days. But yeah, what we do know is that Wales will be taking the field in 10 days' time without Warren Gatland. It's a shame, obviously, that golden era was a proper Welsh side. And we've had a couple of members of that side on this podcast, and they've obviously spoken so fondly. We've got another one coming on in a few weeks in Richard Hibbard. So it'll be interesting to get his thoughts on it. Guys, let's talk about what the headline from the weekend itself, which was England versus France. A strange game, obviously a feeling of elation at the end. But I mean, Jamie, you had errors galore from the French backline in particular in that first half, which meant that they were 3 tries, probably less to the good than they should have been.
Yeah, I think it was more relief than anything else at the end of the game. We stuck to task. We worked hard. We were involved. Interestingly, I thought that the defense had changed. So previously, we've been doing a very aggressive up and get them type style defense, and I think whether it was tactics because they thought maybe the French would look to play around it or not, but they decided to move back to a normal sliding defence. We got caught on the edges of that defence a couple of times, I thought, and thankfully the Frenchies didn't have their super glue or the mittens, the Andy Good mittens on their hands, and they butchered a couple, to be honest, which was but not just that in the game, not just the try scoring opportunities, but within the game itself there was times where we were in trouble and they made unforced errors, and that's very not like the French, so obviously the conditions were the same for both, but the French just didn't manage it.
Jamie, I'm fascinated. What's the reaction been like in France in the aftermath?
Well, obviously they're really disappointed. There's a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk about what Antoine said after the game. He was very sort of tried to be very positive. Said, look, we keep pushing on. We can still win the championship. And that's got to be the next goal. Fabien said that he took a couple of shots at people that they can't, obviously can't, if they want to win a World Cup, then they can't perform in that manner, So I think everybody's disappointed because the French team were, obviously they played against Wales. So whether that was maybe a distorted sort of vision of where they actually are currently, but again, in glimpses in that game was something special. They were scoring really good tries and had opportunity to score other really good tries, but they've got to be disappointed not to win that, because I think that was one that they lost as opposed to necessarily we won. I think credit to the boys, they stuck to task, they worked really hard, and the try at the end was awesome. I thought it was well worked. They took the opportunity really well, and fair play.
Yeah, it's funny. It was obviously England had lost 6 of their last 7 before that game, guys. It was almost an inverse script of effectively England's last 6 losses. England led for 4 minutes in that game. That was it, and it was the last 4 minutes. Is this? I mean, people are talking about it as a watershed moment, and I hate that term. The last equivalent would be the Ireland game, but Brendan, do you see this as having that potential to generate that level of momentum?
Well, funny you mentioned the Ireland game last year when they played exceptionally well. It wasn't a watershed moment, was it? It felt like it at the time, but it wasn't. I think this is an important moment, not least because I think it cemented Finn Smith as the starting 10, which has been an area of debate for 18 months or more. I thought he was excellent, particularly in the second half. And you always kind of feel that he's that sort of player you think will find a way of making it happen. And that last try under pressure was exquisite, wasn't it? Absolutely beautifully delivered pass. So watershed moment, we'll see. Is the basic? It could be. I mean, I'm still not sure. Do you stick with Marcus Smith at 15? I thought he had good moments, bad moments, but that is Marcus Smith. Yeah. I thought Tom Willis had a pretty good game at number 8. I much preferred the look of the back row to what we'd seen in Ireland, even though they played well individually in Ireland. Much better balanced back row. I'm slightly more generous towards England, I think, perhaps than Jamie there. I thought England played pretty well, and I thought they might nudge it even during the game. They did score 4 tries, got the try bonus. I thought it was a pretty good performance. I didn't think it was just France throwing it away, albeit that France, were nowhere near their best. And you can see that, body language and that. You're watching them warm up. It was a dirty, dank old place, Twickenham, on a Saturday night, wasn't it? It was wet and cold. It was gothic. And they didn't look all that happy warming up. I thought, and I wish I could have changed my prediction there and then. The body language wasn't great watching them warming up. I thought they might have a tough day at the afternoon. A tough afternoon at the office.
Interesting. I didn't get that energy from them, to be fair.
No, I didn't. That's what I meant. There was no energy. No energy.
Yeah.
There's loads of talent there, but there wasn't much energy.
They can do that. They can do that and then turn it on. That's the problem with them. You never know.
Yeah.
I think I agree with Brendan where, England kept the pressure on, whether they're making mistakes or not because of, poor handling, or whether it's because actually they were feeling the heat, they were under pressure, and I think England needed to do that. They needed to go into that game, any game with the French teams, you need to keep them, pin back and keep them under pressure. And I think England did that pretty well.
Jamie, would you give Finn Smith the keys to the kingdom at this point, or do you think you need to see a little bit more?
No, I thought he was good. Yeah, I thought he was. I think interesting in the first half. It wasn't necessarily what he did; it's what he didn't do. He didn't make any real mistakes. He orchestrated pretty well. He moved the ball pretty well. They did try and attack, and they did try and take the game to France, which was good. Good to see. Instead of just in those conditions, sometimes you want to play territory. You want to give them the ball and hope that they make mistakes maybe and have a good strong defensive line to combat them. But England played. England tried and they moved the ball and they looked like they went to win the game, which was good. Instead of not lose the game, they went out to win it, and he was part of that. And I think second half he came through and came to his own. Obviously took over the kicking duties as well, which adds a bit more pressure to him. And he's a young kid, so and he seemed to come through that fine. And and fair play at the end. They rolled the dice and they got the win. And everybody had a role to play in that final move, and they did it probably better than they've done before. And it worked perfectly.
Yeah,
and that whole Northampton thing seemed to be working this time. Tommy Freeman had absolutely his best match for England, in my opinion. Alex Mitchell looked himself again. I didn't think he looked himself really in Dublin. He's still a little bit short on rugby at the absolute top level after his injury, but I thought he had a very good match against DuPont, and was one of the reasons the great man had a bang average match. Actually, he had somebody in his face for 80 minutes.
Yeah. I didn't think that DuPont was average. I thought he was still very, very good. I thought that Finn Smith, I think the thing that really interested me is that Smith called the move, and I think that for a young 22-year-old fly half in a cauldron like that, in a moment like that, that's class.
The safest thing would have gone to the corner and try and drive. They scored a drive and try already. That would be the most people's go-to. That's like, we're not taking any risks. We'll go for that, and we'll pick and go, and we'll see what happens. So fair play. The boys really did have a go and went out to win it and deserved.
And a hat tip to the old boy Elliot Daly there. I mean, you forget what a talent he is, and he's had a funny old season because he's been brilliant every time I've watched him for Saracens, but he didn't get a look in for England in the autumn. And to come on with 76 minute he came on, and that was almost his first play, wasn't it? I think it was his first touch. I mean, that was immaculate, absolutely immaculate.
No, it was a super
play. He just has to press forward, and he's on. He's fine. It's good.
Great line. He does seem to be that sort of player, doesn't he? Yeah.
Great line from that in sort of blindside winger role. I mean, that was well.
Did he come on? He came on the wing, did he? I couldn't figure out where he was on. He was on
the wing. Yeah,
he ran a beautiful arc, didn't he? But he was on the left touchline. He ran the arc, and suddenly he was there in space.
But it's such fine margins, that the line out very nearly got locked up, and it's just, but it's the ability of certain players in a certain moment to say, let's be brave, let's go, let's go for it. And I think that anecdotally, it appears to have been Smith who made that call as fly half, and that's a huge feather in his cap. And, a great sign going forward. The Marcus Smith, Finn Smith debate isn't over. And I think that England, there's so much sort of the negativity is saying that one man's career is, has taken a nosedive and the other man's career has gone into orbit. The reality is that this is or should be a fly half battle for the shirt that goes on for a number of years and gets the best out of both of them, which is what's the most important thing. The idea of signatures in certain positions, they have to be earned, and they have to be earned on form. And one of the issues about this game, one of the biggest issues about this game, is exactly how it's perceived and how the England side themselves perceive it, because their inconsistency has been rampant. They have been incredibly inconsistent. And the defeats that they've had, maybe one or two not merited, but overall, they've lost games because they haven't been able to finish them. You know, their performance in the final quarter hasn't been good enough. And they managed to raise a performance for the full 80 minutes this time around. But, you know, where do we go from here? Is it another year of, you know, of up, down, or is it a year where they actually begin to take off? I still think that there are serious problems up front that not serious problems, probably overstating it. They've improved in the areas where they were really weak, i.e. the set piece, scrum in particular. But there are still issues there. And a side that doesn't play like Scotland did in the first half against Ireland might be able to, you know, to put pressure on an England side that, you know, may think that they're on an upward curve when they're just taking the first steps.
I think that debate at number 10, I'd be tempted to look at another angle on it. I mean, I covered Ireland for about 12 years, late 90s, all the noughties, and they had all the players in the world, really, and they didn't end up achieving quite what they should. And the reason, in my opinion, one of the reasons, is they had two long-running debates at fly half. First of all, is David Humphreys or the young Ronan O'Gara, and they switched for a couple of seasons, 2 or 3 seasons. They couldn't make their minds up, and they sort of underperformed. Then it was the mature Rog against the youngster Johnny Sexton. They couldn't make their minds up. And, you know, they didn't always produce the performances they should have done because they had loads of great players in the noughties particularly. So I think really at 10, you need to settle pretty quickly. If you've got a couple of generational players, I mean, obviously injuries can affect this, but I think if you've got 2 really, really class acts, you have to settle pretty quickly on which one's your number 1 choice.
The only thing I would say about that is that the Smith debate is that they're different style players, whereas the Irish guys you sort of mentioned are a very similar style player, you know. So yeah, you're probably going to get similar from either one, whether you go for Sexton or Rog or whatever. It's not too dissimilar. But with Marcus and Finn, you've got 2 different products, you know. So why not use that to benefit England? And let's say, well, not necessarily, well, you're my number 1 every time, but this particular game, actually, we want to play this style, and we'll go with Marcus. And this is what we want to do. We want to be attacking around here, or we're attacking slightly closer, or we just need a bit of a maverick to try and sort of unbreak defenses, or we want to be safe. We're going to want to really control the game. We want to make good decisions, and not give the opposition an opportunity to get into the game. And we're going to be, squeaky clean, and we'll go with Finn. Or it's why don't we look at it in that sense and say, well, look, let's get the best man for the job, and that's dependent also on the opposition and the style they want to play. If they want to play a conservative style all the time, then obviously one will suit that more than the other. And if they want to really attack and have a go and try and win games, then, although that said, Finn, won that game, was rewarded for bravery in essence as well, because, if that had backfired, then everyone would have gone, well, why didn't we go to the corner and drive over, English style? But fair play, it worked out.
You're almost back to the old Rob Andrews, Stuart Barnes debate in the early 90s. And obviously Stuart missed out. Rob got the vote, but England did win 3 Grand Slams. So, which was the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite far. It might feel recent to you, Brendan.
Yeah, that's a long way back.
Oh, well, you've got to study history to know how the future's going to pan out, boys.
Well, thankfully, Rob told me about that a lot.
I just bet you got
he did mention it a lot throughout my years.
And Stuart mentions it occasionally, as you probably imagine.
I mean, the other thing is that it was a game in which England took pretty well every opportunity that they had.
Yeah.
The French must have butchered 50% of their opportunities.
Yeah.
Oh, at least.
So that's a game, that's something that has got to be taken into account. And I can't remember a Six Nations game where I've seen a team, let alone France, whose handling is, obviously one of the things that everybody applauds. I've never seen a team spill as much ball as they did.
No.
Simple. It was the simple stuff. It wasn't like they'd spilled, tough passes or difficult offloads. That they're actually more often not. They did the hardest part, and they did the difficult things to put them in a situation where it was just a 2-on-1, straightforward 2-on-1, and Antoine, whether he tries to take it one hand or whatever the reason, because he was maybe flying really, to get there, he spills it. But that was in theory the easy part of it.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, we'll look ahead to Scotland next week, obviously, but that is a massive game for both parties in terms of the way they look at this Six Nations. If England win it, they're looking at 4 wins out of 5 potentially, which all of a sudden
I think we've broken the back with the two teams that we started with. There's obviously there's definitely some bumps in the path and the road still, but hopefully we can push on now and get some confidence, and that'll seal some of the extra cracks that we've still got.
I think hand on heart, Steve Borthwick would have taken a try bonus win and a losing bonus point in Dublin in the first 2 matches. If you'd given him that 3 weeks ago, he would have bitten your hand off.
Yeah, he would have taken that. Jamie, I enjoy that despite your French identity crisis, you're still referring to England as we.
Oh yeah, but I wore the rose, so it's different for me.
Good. I'm glad still here. One, I mean, look, we've obviously mentioned a few of the top performers for England. Alex Mitchell being one, Finn Smith obviously being another. Ollie Lawrence, I think we should mention this. I mean, Thomas Ramos clearly didn't fancy tackling him, so that was an enjoyable clip to see at the very least.
Nor did Jalibert, no. Nor did Pendergast last week. I mean, he's been a raging bull, flying at anyone and everyone. To be fair,
he's been superb. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Tom Curry, who we had our doubts about at the start of this tournament, and somehow from major hip surgery, he seems to be operating at the peak of his powers, such that he's all of a sudden in the Lions discussion again. And I've seen a lot of teams go out this week, and he's people's test starter. That's maybe overstating it slightly, but I mean, guys, that was his best game since Rugby World Cup 2019.
Yeah, I mean, remarkable comeback from him, and we have to acknowledge that, because I, for one, didn't think he was quite the player he was. I mean, presumably those injuries do take a massive amount of time and effort to come back, and you're not going to be 100% even 3 or 4 months down the line. There comes a point, where you only after a lot of work you're actually back on it. And yeah, the physicality is back, but also the pace and agility to get in, into the breakdown. So he's had 2 fine matches. He was very good in Ireland as well. So fair play to him. Excellent.
I think there's not just the physical aspect of recovery. Getting back to the highest level takes, Percy relying on all his experience there as well, and that sort of rugby touch, that that feeling, and that's obviously whether you've 100% with a hip or not, or an injury, it still takes a little bit of time to sort of work that back.
Yeah, I think his mental toughness isn't in doubt, and the way that he's come back from the injury, because it's anybody will tell you that a hip surgery of that sort is very debilitating, and to come back from it and play international rugby again is a huge tribute. I've sort of heard a lot of the the praise for him, and I think that it is definitely merited. But just looking at it objectively, I looked at he's picking his moments, and he's picking them brilliantly at the moment. But his mobility is definitely not what it was, and there's no reason to expect it to be. The fact that he can play as well as he has done and been as influential as he has done says a hell of a lot. It's still early days. They said after the Ireland game that he was hobbling very badly immediately afterwards. So, look, I just think it's a good luck to him, and but it's a
that's a good.
The other factor there, of course, is it's a mental thing. A lot of hype about Henry Pollock recently, and we've been part of that. Maybe Ben Earl switching back to 7 because Tom Willis needs to be in the team. Ben Curry playing very well. These are the sort of things that motivate players who are coming back from injury and can see their place in doubt. People beginning to doubt them. When you got those guys, those hounds, chasing you, I think it gives you another 5%, 10%, and we've seen that in both these matches so far.
Well, he's part of a bloody competitive unit. That we haven't
Yes.
even mentioned Chandler Cunningham South, obviously. Tom Pearson knocking on the door. So no, there was a feeling he was on borrowed time, and there's still sort of a nagging doubt that he is. But he has shown that he can still do it at the highest level, which I think probably proved us slightly wrong. So fair play to Tom. Guys, well, actually, Jamie, I wanted to ask about the French team very quickly. One Grand Slam since 2010. Sorry, one title since 2010. A title now is looking unlikely. They probably go to Dublin second favourites, if we're being honest, off the back of that performance. Although I still think that game is a little bit of a toss-up, depending on which French side shows up. But it's symptomatic of French rugby as a whole, because that is vast underachievement relative to the capabilities of the domestic game.
I think that's always been a blame on French rugby in a certain sense, that they've always had quality players, have always been performing and competing really well with their club. Obviously, Stade Toulousain have been, European champions for God knows how many times now. So, they've always been competing at a very high level. But yet, together as a collective, it doesn't always gel, doesn't always work. They've got huge potential, and everybody's so excited when they see the teams they put out and the players they have, absolute quality, and they rip up trees. They're literally scoring tries from nowhere based on nothing, and they're doing stuff off script, and it's fantastic to see. But then there will always be one little dead rubber when they can't get themselves up, and they just they lose. And it's whether that's Scotland away because it's maybe a little bit chilly. I think the Irish game depends on the weather. If it's wet and dreary and cold, and maybe they won't get up for it. But this is a French team that on paper can beat anybody on their day, or will beat anybody. It's littered with real quality players, but for some reason they just don't really work well together all the time.
It's incredible when we talk about a side being so affected by the weather. It goes back to 2003 and the semi-final against England there, where when it started raining in Sydney, it sort of seemed that they threw their hands up in the air and said it's not going to be our day.
Yeah.
When it's international rugby, I mean, don't tell me it must rain during the top 14 season in France.
Yeah.
Well, this is my column this week in praise of bad weather, in praise of winter. It's a winter game. Rugby's a winter game. And you can play in 25 degrees in Marseille, but can you play in the pissing rain in Twickenham and -4 at Murrayfield with 67,000 mad Scots? That's what Test rugby is about, surely. And it's certainly what Six Nations rugby is about. It's not about everything being perfect and in your favour. It's about everything being stacked against you.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I came to France, I actually found it harder with the heat. So you're sweating and stuff, and it was harder to keep hold of the board. It's not the same as being in the rain. Whereas in the rain, and I found that whether it was just
Newcastle.
a bit easier to catch. I mean, I was used to it maybe with Newcastle, but with the wind as well. But I don't understand quite. I mean, it's not an excuse by any stretch, but for some reason they were not on form. They dropped. I don't know how many balls, how many mistakes they made in the game, and that's, you can't win Test matches. I mean, they nearly did, and that's very French. They nearly did, but still, it was it was good from an English perspective. It was good to see that they were human.
They missed Ntamak on Saturday as well, didn't they? Especially as a defensive unit. I mean, Jalibert is a speed bump at best at times, and Thomas Ramos isn't the strongest defensively either. And I feel like having a 10 that is strong defensively, albeit obviously, he got in trouble for it a couple of weeks ago now, does make a big difference. And there were just a couple of extra gaps in the back line as a result.
Well, in the press, there was a lot of heat sort of towards Jalibert's defense and his lack of tackling prowess. But you know what you get with him with regard to that. So when you put him in, I mean, they're sort of they're
Right.
not that fat. They're not big fans of him, I don't think. But yet he is a quality player. He can and create stuff from nothing, to be fair, and does regularly with Bordeaux.
What's their option though? Their other option really at the moment is Ramos.
Yeah,
Now,
that's what they go to. Yeah,
and he's probably a bit better defensively, but not a street ahead.
I think he is better defensively for sure. He's a bit bit more solid, and he'll have a go at it. Whereas I think Jalibert at times just doesn't fancy it.
He keeps the hair intact, doesn't he, Jalibert, a little bit? Can I just say, by the way, I think we've been fairly nice to the French. Can I just say, if they had won after that last try of theirs, which had 2 forward passes, possibly 3, it would have been an utter disgrace. That's one of the worst non-tries I've ever seen. It was just shambolic.
What about last week when Dupont passed it 2 meters?
We've given that a good kicking, Jamie, but I couldn't believe how lightly they got away with it on Saturday, that one. If they'd won on that, I'd be spitting.
This is a recurring theme on this podcast, but it is incumbent on these referees to get this right, because it's devaluing tries, it's devaluing contests, it's devaluing a great tournament. And it's been allowed to happen in the Premiership, it's allowed to happen now in Europe, and it's got to end. Forward passes have got to be picked up, and if they look forward to most of the people in the stadium, they're forward.
Well, initially I thought it was the TV angle, that we seem to be having new angles to look at the games, and whether it was that. But then I saw some of the stills from especially the Dupont one the week before, and that was evident to anybody that was, you couldn't call it momentum.
Yeah, no, and there was one in the Ireland game as well. I think a James Lowe pass to Tyke Byrne as well, that apparently from the overhead camera, which no one's actually seen.
And which is readily available. They can look at that instantly at TMO. That is the one that almost always decides it. You can't cheat the overhead camera. You can see exactly what's going on.
So the question is, are there camera angles that are being suppressed in the interest of entertainment?
You start getting a bit paranoid about it. I think it's a bit sinister how many obvious, non-debatable forward passes are being allowed without debate, without even reference to the TMO. And you think, is this the admin? Is it referees? Is it coaches? Is it TV? But everybody at the ground and everybody on watching TV, forward pass. That's a forward pass. And they never get looked at.
Ollie, you're looking slightly circumspect. Where do you stand on this entertainment against reality debate?
No, I'm looking circumspect because this is the 18th time we've hashed this topic in the past year.
Yeah, but nobody else. There's a conspiracy not to talk about it. It's like Emperor's Clothes. You've got to talk about it because it's there. It's what all the people I know, the fans, the clubhouse, friends, that's what they talk about, but it never gets talked about on the TV.
This is the first time where I've seen genuine momentum behind, obviously corroborating everything you guys are saying in terms of the general public going, actually forward passes are an epidemic. It's not just, the odd one or the odd contentious call once every 10 games. We've had probably 3 or 4 out of the 6 matches where contentious forward passes have led to important tries. Not important tries in the France-Wales game because there were 7 of them or however many. But there does seem to be a little bit of, public momentum behind this. It'll be interesting to see what comes of it as well. I should say the Irish fans are probably waiting for us to eat our humble pie, in that we have also half of us back the Scots to win, first of all, this weekend, and we also back the French for a Grand Slam and not the Irish at the start of the tournament. So, of course, we are red-faced and feeling silly.
Speak for yourself.
I back the Irish.
Right, Nick.
No, Nick got it wrong. You backed them to win, to the Scottish to win, Nick. I can go over that if you want.
I don't feel red-faced about it, though. I feel particularly aggrieved that Scotland decided not to show up for 40 minutes.
Well, that's the 11th time in a row that they haven't done that against the Irish, to be fair. So, the rugby journalists, you could have hopefully seen the pattern. Where
we read it wrong is thinking that the pattern had changed, because the autumn indicated that it had probably changed. And I don't know whether the Irish, are living in Scotland's head or not. That's one of the claims that's been made. But certainly it appeared that way, because they just didn't, if you compare their autumn performances and the way they hit the ground running in most of those games compared to this one, it left you nonplussed, really.
Yeah, they were. I mean, do we make a case for excusing them on the basis that they were slightly unlucky? Obviously, Tuipulotu out before the start of the tournament. Darcy Graham had a great first 20 minutes before he and Finn Russell took each other out, obviously losing their most important player as well. That was fairly, Jamie, non-ideal. And you got the feeling after that the game was pretty much over.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Finn, everybody knows the quality that Finn has and the importance, the role he has in that Scottish team. So, him not being on the field was going to, affect them massively. I think credit to Ireland, though, they played, they played the way they do. They were strong. They carried well. They moved the ball well. They took the opportunities. They maybe created a couple more opportunities they didn't take. But yeah, I think Scotland seems to, every beginning of every tournament we talk about Scotland being this year, and right, they're going to do this and they're going to do that, and everybody's excited by the sort of, I suppose they have an element of Frenchness to them, in the sense that they can create and play some wonderful rugby, and you're like buoyed by that, and then they can also just not turn up, and it's difficult to know, why there's that balance, or what the reasons are. But they definitely didn't turn up against the Irish.
Yeah,
the fault line for Scotland to me is always their pack can go very well. It can be inspired and wild on Scottish, but too often that pack gets bettered and beaten up. And Ireland pack just did a number on them, and without that forward, without that possession and forward dominance, they get sort of reduced as a team. And then, yes, I think you can give a bit of a caveat to be without three players like that, or two on the day, and obviously the skipper beforehand. That's a pretty big chunk to take out of your back division when your back division is your strength.
Yeah.
So I think a little bit of sympathy towards them there. But there was only one winner, wasn't there? Ireland were winning that match before the two guys went off. I thought.
They weren't playing well at all before those two guys.
Yeah, Scotland. Darcy was playing well, but Scotland generally weren't playing well.
No, not as a team. They weren't playing well. I didn't understand why. Every time Schoeman gets the ball, the old cry or shoe goes up, and I just couldn't understand why he wasn't starting. No. He is one of the players who is a regulator for that pack and how they go. He was intrinsic to what they did in the autumn. I didn't get that at all, and it's those sorts of things. In truth, it indicates that we thought that Scotland had come into the sort of depth that they needed, and maybe this game put a question mark against it. One thing it didn't put a question mark against is Prendergast. I thought that his poise and accuracy and cool-headedness in the game was phenomenal for a bloke. He's like Finn Smith. He's 22, but he's probably played less than Smith in the Ireland shirt. In fact, he certainly has. So I thought he was outstanding.
Yeah,
and again, the week before he got taken off early as well, so there's question marks whether he would go again at all. So fair play to him to sort of just crack on and get on with it. Because that takes, again, that mental strength to just say, right, we're going for this one. And
one little mention back on the forward pass thing. What a phenomenal pass it was from him. And just note, he stopped. He killed his speed. He turned the shoulders, he planted the feet, and that's why his 30-yard spin pass, if it went 6 inches forward, I'd be amazed. It was a beautiful pass. It was legal, and that's how you bloody well do it.
Yeah, yeah. I was fact checking you, Nick, when you said he was 22, because I thought he was 21. Funnily enough, the day this podcast is released, he turns 22. So
Perfect.
I was right. God, that's nauseating.
I checked it beforehand, Ollie.
I know you did. I know you did. I mean, look, the Schoeman thing is interesting because, in essence, Scotland got overpowered, right? And they've taken off they've not let their other bruiser in the front row, obviously Zarnefakers, and I still think had a fairly good game.
Yeah, I thought he carried well. He was involved heavily, which is what you want.
Yeah, so you had that side of the scrum, doing his bit in terms of the matching Ireland up front, and Schoeman didn't get to, which was surprising. But also, maybe we're seeing that the autumn was a little bit of a red herring for the Irish. Brendan, you saw the warning signs, and they've sort of been extinguished to a decent degree over the past 2 rounds.
Yeah, well, we've all been here, as Jamie was saying, with Scotland before. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is definitely one of the better Scotland teams and squads we've seen, I think. But there is still that fault line mentally in putting a 5-game Six Nations tournament together. And I don't know how you address it. I'm not a great fan of psychology in sport. I think that's the job of the coach or the players or the captain. But it needs addressing. There's some, they ought to be better than they are in the Championship, Scotland.
They'll address it for the England game, I'm sure.
And that's the thing, and that is the mad thing. And I dare say Wales
like they do every
well against England this year. Even the Welsh team at the moment will somehow conjure a performance against England.
Yeah. One positive thing to say about Scotland, apparently Finn Russell passed his HIA, and there was a feeling when he went off, I was like, he's too important a player. And Tom Curry's handling back in the autumn showed to me that HIA protocols or concussion protocols are still not as airtight as they should be. I had a feeling he was going to come back on. Apparently, he was talking to, I think, Peter Horn in the team and wasn't remembering things from the game correctly, which suggests that although he passed the HIA, something wasn't quite right, and they obviously made the decision not to put his health first. So I do think the strength and conditioning and physio team and medical team with Scotland deserves a little bit of credit for that. Yeah. Guys, we'll preview, who's your favourites next week. Jamie, since you're not joining us next week, who are you backing between England and Scotland to actually take the win?
Well, I mean, like I said, Scotland always pull it out of the bag against us. They have this crazy habit of turning us over. But I'm going to say England because I'm hopeful that the momentum and the confidence they can get from. I mean, to be fair, the Ireland game started well, and I think we'd sort of papered over some of the cracks that we had in the autumn, and I think we started quite well. We were very competitive, so hopefully we can do that against Scotland, but then put more of an 80-minute sort of performance together, and will be well. I'm hopeful that we can win that one.
Sorry, go on, Nick.
I'm going to say I'm sort of intrigued by Russell at the moment because I actually don't think I watched him for Bath the last couple of games I think that he's played, and watching him for Scotland before he got injured. I'm not quite sure that he's right on top of his game at the moment, and I guess if there's one game, as Jamie's sort of indicating, where he might get back on top of his game, really ride the charger is against England. But I don't think he's been. I don't think he's been at his best recently.
He'll intercept three. He'll intercept 3 of the weekend, and we'll have a hat trick. All right,
probably.
Yeah.
Well, Van der Merwe always scores a couple against England, doesn't he? So
he scored 5 in his last 2, I think, against us. English selection will be really interesting. We'll get into it in more depth next week, but obviously, and Furbank and Faye Waboso aren't far away by the sounds of things, so that would really create a back 3 headache. Lads, should we find out how the predictions league's going? Jamie, sadly, you're ineligible to participate since there's no games coming up.
Probably a good thing.
I was going to say you should feel blessed, Jamie.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you're in second place, so I think you can be happy with that. Obviously, the 3 of you guys, you, Nick, Brendan, and Chris, all predicted a Scotland win, which hasn't worked in your favour. So, Chris and Brendan, you're fighting out for the wooden spoon. with 28 points. Nick, you're on 31, and then myself, Richard is on 33, and then myself and Brett are on 35. So it's close enough, and a couple of results could sway it. That Scotland-England game, I think, will be pivotal. And then there are a couple of difficult ones to call towards the end of the championship. I'm not going to bore everyone with how it all works, but do check the Rugby Paper website if you do want to play along with us.
Well, you don't know how it works, and none of us know how it works.
All I know is that I'm winning. Can't tell you how I got here. Jamie, are you going to any of the games? Particularly, obviously, the games for I think France are away in a week and a half's time, but they're certainly at home in the final weekend, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to some. I've got a couple of bits and pieces on at the moment, so concentrate on that. But I'll definitely be watching them where I can.
Well, enjoy the rest of the championship. Wishing your son, obviously, all the best with his recovery. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.